I think all tech should be built to be inclusive and accessible to people.
Okay, that's a pretty bold claim. So I guess what's your should? Is that like is that like if you don't do it, it should be illegal, or that it's like a moral imperative, or
A mix of both, depending on who is doing it.
okay,
So it's both. It's like a moral and legal sense. So yes, both.
okay. So it should be illegal. So just to make sure I'm
Hmm.
understanding you, I'm going to repeat it back,
Yeah.
right, to make sure. But it sounds like you're saying that if people make a product that's not accessible,
Hmm.
and we can talk about exactly what kind
Yeah.
of accessibility you're interested in, but if it's not accessible, that product should not be legally released.
If it's not accessible, then the people for whom it's not accessible can go through legal processes to say, hey, you have to change or fix your product.
So, like for
So
example, they could sue,
yeah, yeah,
and if a court found that the product, let's
wasn't
say,
meeting whatever.
yeah,
Yeah,
let's say for blind people or
yeah.
colorblind people or something,
Hmm.
that if it wasn't able to be used by that group of people, that they would be required or instructed to make changes to it so that it would
Yeah,
be accessible.
yeah.
Okay. What about? I mean, I just to sort of put little feelers out
Hmm.
to see if um, what if they were like, look, we don't have the money to do this. Would you want them to remove the product from the market?
I think it. If the company didn't have the money to do it, I feel like for me it comes down to, are there other competitors that the person who's suing could use? Like, why do they need this product in particular? And if for some reason this is like the only thing available and this is the only thing they can use, then yeah, they either have to make it accessible or figure it out.
Okay. All right. So I don't want to misrepresent you, but this
Hmm.
seems like a pretty strong claim.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's. I'm going to ask a couple more questions.
Hmm.
So, does it depend on like the size of the company that puts out the piece of software? Like, what if it's just one dude who made a thing?
It's more around the, I guess usually size of company and how much market share they have go hand in hand. But if there was, for some reason, some one little shop that has cornered a specific software
Yeah.
area, um, then yes, it would apply to them. But it
Okay.
also would have, so yeah, it's more around, uh, for me in particular, it's around the, and that's where the accessibility comes in, is the actual access part of accessibility, of people being able to access and use whatever tools they need, to go about their lives. Yeah.
So you say tools. That was my next question,
Hmm.
which is like, is this kind of thing uh, is your interest in this restricted to different genres? Like I was thinking games. Would it apply to stuff like, I don't know, an app that does photo manipulation, or would it also apply to games?
It would apply to both. I'm mainly thinking tech just because that's the space I'm in and I understand that a bit more. Um, yeah. So just tech in general, any technology based
So
thing.
so what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to misrepresent,
Yeah.
but basically any app that anyone decides to release,
Hmm.
um, whether it's a small company or just one person, or a big company, whether it's like a game, or maybe like a new filter for photographs. You know, like I've seen
Yeah.
all these things where they put like rouge on your cheeks or stars in the sky. You know, like around your face and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's apps that'll add freckles.
Yeah, all of the
Okay,
things.
so anything like that, or anything more serious like social media, or you know, for the whole range.
Whole range of tech,
Okay,
from silly little calculator app to Google.
okay. So if they release something that,
Hmm.
again, make sure I'm
Yeah.
representing you. But if there's any person who can't use it, that they're liable under law to address or redress, I don't know what the right word is, but to correct that problem so that
Any
that person
person
can use
who
it.
any person who can't use it for a I want to say like a disability reason.
Okay.
That's part of the accessible inclusive part of it. Any person who it is built in a way where they would not be able to use the functionality that's being provided.
Okay. And just again to make sure I'm
Hmm.
understanding that this probably includes things like blindness,
Yeah.
deafness, um, color blindness. Yeah, I guess when it comes to apps, like you don't have to worry about, I don't know, short people or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
But you have to worry
Yeah.
about, which is a thing in other domains,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
like, but you'd have to worry about basically people who are maybe process information differently, right? So like
Hmm.
dyslexia or, um, yeah, I guess color blindness is a good example. Um, okay, all right, wow, all right. So so you say that they should be liable legally and morally, which okay, and it, I guess the last piece of this
Hmm.
is this like is this like a hope for an idealized world, or is this something that you'd want enacted in our world?
I think we already see it a bit in our world. So uh, companies generally get legal claims where they're like their product isn't accessible and goes against various sets of ADA guidelines,
Yeah.
and they have to respond to those. So I guess it is both a like uh, I I would hope though that, and this is where the moral part comes in, where people make that choice intentionally up front, where they're like, we're going into this knowing we
Right.
aren't going to be accessible and we're just going to be dicks, and when we get sued we'll deal with it,
Right.
rather than the after the fact being sued and being like, what, I didn't know there were
Right.
blind people who'd want to use this app. Like,
Right. So what I'm hearing is like ideally people would just want to do this,
yes,
but
yeah,
maybe we can't hope for a world that perfect.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's where the legal, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
so
Do you,
that's where people can release it, and if no one ever,
uses it?
yeah, then it doesn't.
So do you see any like complications with this? Like, are there is there anything about this idea that gives you pause?
um I think the parts that give me pause are the things that I deal with myself and my own projects, in that I'll make something that's just for me and it's available and accessible on just the general internet,
Yeah.
no password protection. It's built for my device, my level of sight.
Mhm. And maybe you
But it's,
throw it on GitHub or something like that.
yeah, but it's not. Uh, I think, and that's where I like the intention of it. Of if someone was like, "Hey, I tried to go and use this site and it just didn't work for me," I could be like, "Wasn't actually meant for like public consumption," and I'll just throw up a very shitty password protection on it,
Uh huh.
um, and be like, "Great, I'll just like, yeah." So I think it's uh, the challenges I see with it are the smaller creators who create something for a tiny community, and they're not ready once they're not ready when other people start to use it. They're not ready when it grows in scale.
Yeah.
And they didn't think that far ahead.
Right. Right. So what I'm hearing is that you're maybe concerned that it could um, maybe disincentivize smaller developers.
I think it could. I think people, in my ideal world, people would be okay with things taking a little bit longer.
I see.
Like the time that we take to put into writing tests, and that's an okay step to do.
Uh
The
huh.
time that we take to put into profiling for performance,
Yeah.
and that's okay step to do. This would be an okay step. It wouldn't be
Yeah.
like, ah, oh, no, we should get it out. We don't need this. You should be like, no, kind of the same way for these other things. Like, no, we need that for release.
Right. 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 I
So,
guess.
yeah.
I guess. What would you think about somebody suggesting that if you release an app and you didn't test it, that you would be legally, um, on the hook in case it did something wrong. Like,
I
let's say
think
it made your phone crash or something.
hmm I think it's funny for me, at least based in the context of the US. If I was using an app that broke in a pretty horrendous way, I could actually still sue and be like, this app bricked my phone.
Uh
I
huh.
did not know it was going to do that. They, and I lost this part of my life, or I wasn't able to do my job. And
Yeah.
so this was the impact. Um, and, and I think that's kind of, uh, I feel like as engineers, that's why a lot of times why we write tests is combating the fears of releasing something that's broken and buggy and
Yeah.
has like some large scale impact. Um, so I don't, I guess for me, that's always a weird potential with tech, at least in the US. You can generally just get sued for,
Sure. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, there's you can definitely get sued. They just might not win,
yes,
right?
yeah.
But right, anybody can sue you for anything. But it kind of sounds like you're interested in a law or a provision or whatever that makes it pretty clear.
Yes, that
Like,
this is as an option that someone could um, I guess that makes it clear that if this product was not accessible to someone who felt that it should be, that they would have the legal means of doing so. And it's not just the standard American suing everybody for any reason, but like an
right,
actual thing that they can point to.
right. And it sounds like the burden of proof is just that there needs to be a person with a disability who can't use even an aspect of the app or
Uh,
like
I I would consider to be the main functionality of the app.
uh-huh. So like um, whatever the app was intended to do, whether it's entertainment or
Yeah,
video editing or
yeah,
chat or whatever, if they can't engage in the intended use of the app,
yeah.
it really just requires one person to say, "Look, because of my dyslexia, I can't use this."
hmm
Um, okay. Um, how confident are you that this would be like a good thing for society?
Very confident.
Okay, so if you don't
Yeah.
feel comfortable with this, let me know. But like, could you put a number on it? If I said like from 0 to 100, 100 meaning that you had no doubts whatsoever, and zero
Mhm.
being that you were full of doubt and you didn't even have any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say 75%. That's like such a perfect like 75%, but yeah.
Okay, so pretty confident.
Yeah.
Okay, but not 100% sure.
No, no.
Like
Cuz
maybe this.
humans can I think I've read enough dystopian novels to be
Uh huh.
like we'll always find a way to fuck something up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Okay. And you've already sort of said that maybe people, like you said yourself, if you were made something for your own use, you'd be like worried about making sure people couldn't get to it in case you hadn't like launched it yet or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can you think of any other possible negatives that it might have?
Other, I feel like the negatives I think of are ones that are just us um, accepting with being more inclusive in what I mentioned of things taking longer to ship and develop.
Uh,
Um, in terms of um, needing time to, especially in larger companies, to do the uh, user research you need to understand how people are, how people with various
right,
levels of disabilities are interacting with your product.
right.
Um, and I also think it could be something that you don't have to, that you could take your time with, in that the people who are using your app, you can be like, hey, to these people, how has this been for you, and serving your like current users. But yes, I think it's the time impact that I feel most people I've talked to about this struggle with.
Yeah, yeah. Like it definitely costs time,
Mm-hmm.
and time is money, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it seems like if people had to worry about this being a being a say a potential threat, like let's say somebody wanted to release an app. Let's say they had an idea for um, whatever. I know filters are really cool, right? So people they want to do
Yeah.
like a clown nose or something
Yeah.
or whatever, and they go okay, or like that's maybe what was the one, the de aging or the
Oh yeah. Yeah.
aging filter. There's
Yeah.
a ton of these
Yeah.
things, right?
Yeah.
So let's say somebody has a cool idea. They think, okay, I could use a neural network to age people, and it would look really
Yeah.
cool, right? And then they think, oh man, if I put this on the Apple Store for $1, like I might get sued because what if there's some disability or kind of person who I didn't think about, like
Mm-hmm.
um, because I think we can agree like the interesting thing about humans is that there's such a wide
Yeah.
like variety of experience
Mm-hmm.
and of capability.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think for me, the world that this goes to is a world similar to now, where we have 50 million different packages and tools that help you solve different tasks. There would be ones that help with this.
yeah,
There would be people who are like, hey, just npm install like
right, right,
this accessibility suite that
yeah,
helps you bootstrap your app to
yeah.
meet whatever set of guidelines you've determined.
For sure. When I was working on a project and I was worried about color blindness and I was
Yeah.
trying to find information about color blindness. Um, and like there's information out there,
Mm-hmm.
people make color palettes and things.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're ready to admit like there's that takes time and effort.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of seems like there might be so many different things you have to consider that there's no amount of time that would let
I
you finish.
I think it's that sentiment is why I want the legal repercussions. Otherwise, we'll never make any progress. We'll
Yeah,
never start because we're like, oh, I have 50 million yaks to shave, and I'll just
sure.
sit there and like watch them. And so I think that's my like the legal push would, as you said, time is money. So there'd be people who would be like, oh, if I can help make this cheaper and faster,
Okay, yeah.
that's a way that I can contribute. But it is all things that there would be a period of time where There would be a lot of rage and anger, and in true capitalistic ways, someone would find a way to monetize on what I consider to be a good, and I'll have to just accept that aspect of it.
So if I understand you right, um, were this law to be passed, it sounds like you're thinking there's going to be people who would come out with ways of making it easier and cheaper, and
Hmm.
like you say, just download a package and it
Yeah,
takes care. But
and there, oh, go
no,
ahead.
no, you go ahead, please.
And I know that there will always be edges and exceptions, but I'm kind of excited to find those things out.
What would be an example of an exception or an edge?
I have no idea.
Okay,
In terms of people, in terms of like the
yeah,
different ways that people interact with technology and the
yeah,
different challenges that they face. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I so yeah. So before we even continue, because obviously this is all about pushing back,
Yeah.
but like it would be great. Like I totally agree. Like if people thought more about this, it would be fantastic because there are. I remember I took a class in ergonomics in college,
Hmm.
and they talked about how if you build a car for the 95 percentile of people, right? Like you base it up the seat distance on height from the steering wheel, and then like the size of the steering wheel
Yeah.
based on the 95 percentile for hand size or whatever. If you do that, you're going to wind up with a car that nobody can use because every person is going to be at least outside of the 95th percentile on at least one thing. You know, like
Yeah.
whether it's foot size or hand size or reaction time or
Hmm.
so like it's really hard to design for a wide audience, and like I wish people spent more time thinking about that.
Yeah.
um, but at the same time, like you just started talking about there's hard problems that you're not even aware of,
Hmm.
like I knew about color blindness,
Yeah.
but I know very little about like blindness.
Yes.
And like it's really hard to imagine designing, let's say you want to make Flappy Bird.
Hmm.
Like how would you build that for a blind person? Like that seems like a creative challenge, not just
Yeah.
like download an npm package,
Yeah.
you know.
And I think that I it might be an idealized version of tech, but I feel like we've come up with a bunch of creative problems to really hard things, and I want us to get this.
Hmm.
I don't want us to continue building tech as we have been and continuing to leave people out of it and exclude them and then building on top of that tech. And so now you're just building on tech
Sure.
that was already not inclusive. So you're just like, we're stacking this pile that I'm not a fan of.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, totally. If you go out and pick a random, let's say, graphing library off the shelf, the default colors are probably not going to be suitable for people who have color
Yeah.
blinds. And like, why? Why would the defaults not be inclusive, right?
Yes. Or why even not generally support like a small library of color schemes for
Right.
different, yeah.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at
Mhm.
is like a graphing library is never going to be suitable for a blind person, or like in very limited ways. You know, like if I want to make interactive graphs, just to pick one topic
Yeah.
out of 1,000, right? Like, um, it's almost like maybe you could do it with sound or something, you know,
Yeah.
but
But
then
that's the like
but then there's
that's
going to be
the
people who can't hear.
yeah, but they have the visuals of the graphics and maybe good subtitles since you already have the sound that was describing what they should be seeing.
I mean, maybe, but there's people who can't see or hear.
Yeah.
Sure. Like, I mean, I think for any sort of problem, we're going to be able to find people, right,
Hmm.
who can't.
Yeah,
There's
and then they
some
can feel. And I believe there's like some tech that allows them to interact with digital text that same
totally,
way.
totally.
So you have the text available, and
Yeah,
hopefully it can pipe to this system,
yeah,
and we build those connections in.
yeah. I've watched a YouTube channel of a guy who's blind, and he talks about he's got a thing that gives him braille,
Mm-hmm.
So like it produces braille under his fingertips.
Yeah.
Um, but try like imagine designing something.
That excites me. I
It-
think at least
yeah.
how do I think it's a general problem because people even trying I guess it's just a dumb example, but
Okay.
it's why people enjoy working on iOS instead of Android.
Okay.
There's less choices, less diversity in the mix.
Okay.
When you build stuff for Android, it's like, well, there's 50 million different devices with different specs, and it's challenging. um but there's some really good work that people have done to one make that easier, um, and worthwhile for themselves. And I feel like I want inclusive, accessible tech to have that same level of like cachet and funness that we give to other aspects of challenging tech. Like AI is challenging, ML is challenging. There's a lot of fuzzy, weird things about it,
Uh huh.
but we care about that more for a reason that's I understand, but we've been needing and having to discuss inclusive, accessible tech since tech. Like, it's very fascinating to me.
Sure. Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is like being in tech, we're used to working on hard problems.
We're used to hard problems with very difficult, challenging things we need to discuss and solve, for.
Yeah.
And
I guess.
sometimes requires a lot of thought and requires people who want to like be get PhDs and be professors and write papers about it. And then
Yeah.
like there's a lot that we do that is a lot of deep thinking
Sure.
that this space could also have and does have. I just don't really see it playing out as much in products.
Okay. So I think we've explored like what the claim is and
Mm-hmm.
where you're coming at it from and I think it's pretty clear. So I'm going to ask you to try to imagine um, someone who doesn't buy into this.
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm sure you've talked to people about this
Yeah.
and people have pushed back. Um, what do you think? What do you think is like the best argument against the idea of making legal repercussions for non-accessible software?
The best argument against it?
Yeah,
Um,
or maybe not the best, but just a good or something that maybe gives you a little bit of uh, maybe makes you put your hand on your chin.
I think give me a second actually.
Yeah,
Let me
sure. Or maybe just what's the thing that worries you the most about it? Like if someone says, "Gosh, what about this?"
I I feel like it might be it might also be the people I've talked with. I haven't heard many great arguments against it that weren't from a place of, I think, that wasn't a more drastic place, almost slightly opposite of me in this case of, I think nothing should go through the legal system in this way. Like
Uh-huh.
I always in my when I'm thinking of it, I'll ask like, well, how do you feel about like Americans with Disabilities Act,
Uh-huh.
like having to have ramps? And they're like, oh, I don't think we should have that either. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know where you're at. You're at this like, and so that's why don't think it's the best argument I've heard against it. It's just a different perspective on our current legal system and wanting something different from me. Whereas I
Yeah.
think I'm leading into it. There are people who are like, no, we should just take away everything. So I don't say it's the best, but it's the only one where I've been like, I really can't say anything else to you in this
Okay.
discussion. Yeah.
So I think the idea is that maybe maybe you're a little worried. Maybe worried isn't the right word, but maybe you're thinking like one possibility is to really legislate that people be good people,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe another possibility is that maybe by legislating that people be good people, maybe that does some harm, or
Um, I don't think. I think we'll be imaginative and come up with new ways of harm. um, it's almost like not even a fair in this, but a general. Always wondering where we'll go as people, and
yeah,
just being like, okay, this will be a new thing. How could we fuck this up?
right,
Yeah.
right. So okay, so I guess the thing that gives me pause would be the idea that, like, as a software developer, I I would be I feel like I would be much less likely to publish software. Like I would be like, man, it's just overwhelming. The idea of being sued for something that I thought was fun, that I had this cool idea,
But
and
I
now I
guess
have
my
to hire a
question,
lawyer.
but I guess my question for you would be, when putting this out here, was it something that you were like, I want this for the world and I think people should use it? Or is it something where you're like, I want this for me and I'm showing people my work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can. Even in the first case, it still
Mm-hmm.
would give me pause. Like, let's go back to maybe the
Yeah.
Flappy Bird example,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that when that came out, it was a phenomenon,
Yeah.
right? I think that person. I mean, I'm sure he sold a million
Mm-hmm.
copies of Flappy Bird, and like,
Mm-hmm.
because I remember reading about he didn't like the publicity and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like, I can't even imagine how you'd make that accessible for people who don't have eyes. Like maybe there's a way, but it would be a whole new game. You know, like it seems like it would take just as long to develop Flappy Bird as it existed as it would be to develop the sound version of it,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe there'd be pitches and you have to make sure the pitch stays in a range of, some
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
maybe we can imagine a thing, but like that's a whole nother game.
And imagine what it would have been like if I have no idea actually how accessible Flappy Bird was. I don't even know how much I even played it myself. It was
Yeah,
iOS maybe. Anyway,
I don't
I can't
know.
even remember. Yeah.
Yeah,
But in a world, let's say Flappy Bird, well, yes, was released and had pitches. I'm like, how fucking cool would it have been to be like, here is this game that anyone can play, or almost anyone can play.
with that I
Oh,
totally agree. Like it would
and
be
how
super
much
cool.
more money could he have made for a market that's probably been like, oh shit, here's a game that
Sure,
I can play with my sighted friends.
sure,
And we're like, we can all talk about it. And it's like, fuck yeah, Flappy Bird.
sure. I'm just trying to focus on the
Mhm.
problematic part, which is that I think it would have an effect where people would be less likely to publish in the first place. I think people would be overwhelmed, and instead
Yeah.
of being like, "Hey, here's this cool thing I
I
made,"
guess the difference for me is I don't consider that problematic.
well, if there's fewer apps for people to use, so maybe let me ask a
Hmm.
different question. Like, isn't the goal of this idea so that more people can use more software,
Yes.
like to enable people?
Yeah. But there
But
will be that period of time where it'll be harder to put things out because you have to take more care and thought, and you're part of the first group of people figuring out how to do it at scale.
so at least in that time period, can you imagine that there might actually be less software put out?
Yes, but it'll be software that's almost revolutionary in its own way. It's its own gold rush.
But if your goal is to enable people
Hmm.
with new kinds of software that they can use and empower them, and um,
And they'll get that.
but if it also might cause fewer people to develop software.
But that's my point is we clearly, even from your standpoint, we wouldn't be happy in that state. And as technologists, we would find a way out of whatever the bottlenecks are. We would identify those bottlenecks. We'd be able to put a name to it and say, oh, yes, this is the blank blank problem that we are solving here.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the 5 different people who are working on stuff for it,
Okay.
and think they want to solve it. But we don't have even that language now.
So it sounds like you're going back to something you said before. So, and I think what I'm hearing is you believe that we as technologists would come up with really good ways to solve these problems, and once we had them, like it would be a much easier
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Um, how
It's
sure of you? How sure are you of that?
pretty sure. I feel like we are already advancing really quickly in tech with problems that we thought would take us a lot longer to solve. And this is me just thinking about where we're at right now with AI and ML and all of the things that it was like. I remember in college wanting to build an app that would let me identify a phone. Identify a plant by like pointing at it with my phone.
Uh
And
huh.
the tech for that was fucking crazy.
Yeah.
It was like talking to people, they're like, yeah, I'm like, get my PhD in that. And I'm like, well,
Right.
shit, I am. I'm
Right.
like a software undergrad. Like,
Yeah.
this is not. And now it's like, it's just a library.
Right.
It's like just a thing that you can easily do,
Right.
and there are of course still bugs and challenges with it, but we solve that. So I feel pretty confident that given a problem space, and especially in our current system, given a problem space that you could probably monetize because you'd have a cost to the legal fees you're offsetting,
Uh huh.
we would find a way
Uh huh.
and dedicate more brain power and thinking and resources to it,
Okay.
because there'd be more of a reason to outside of the moral good that isn't clearly driving us.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like you're saying if we add this legal requirement, it changes the equation so that people are being more incentivized to build better libraries and
Hmm.
best practices and
Yeah.
things like that. That's
And
that's what you're saying.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it would take time, and that's the again always the hardest part. And I would be I want that struggle to happen.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to come at it a different way.
Yeah.
What could you find out? And this is kind of a hard question to
Hmm.
conceptualize, but what kind of evidence could you find out? What maybe study we could do where we count apps or we count, yeah, like
Hmm.
something like that, that would make you think maybe this isn't such a great idea. Like,
uh, I
yeah,
could find out that majority of the world's disabled people are like, we don't need your apps. We actually have had a secret marketplace on the dark web. And we're fine. We've been
right,
building stuff for each other. We don't need you.
right.
And I'm like, great, okay.
So yeah, so maybe if you found out that there's actually apps that can already take user interfaces that exist in like screen reading or something
Hmm.
like that. They can
Yeah,
they can somehow read it out for you and that you can use it.
yeah.
Would that make you less sure then about that you need to make this a legal requirement?
Um, yes, depending on the ways. those things are intended to communicate with that tool.
Uh huh.
So it would really depend on like how successfully that works,
Yeah.
and if the people who it's meant to be for, if they're like, this is really shitty and we need something different.
Yeah. Okay. Um, what if you found out that it? I'm not saying this would be the case.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you probably know how I feel, but I'm not necessarily saying
Yeah.
this is the case. But what if you found out that let's say this year before you enacted the Thalida law,
Yes.
there's a million people made a million apps or
Hmm.
whatever, and the year after the law was enabled, there was only like 10,000 apps,
Yeah.
and maybe we waited 5 years for technology to catch back up,
Hmm.
and maybe there's 20,000 apps.
Yeah.
Would that maybe make you less confident, or would you think that it would be worth it?
I I think it'd be worth it.
So even though there'd be fewer apps available
Hmm.
for people to use,
There'd be apps that are more accessible to people
uh huh,
and more um I don't want to say well built because that, but yes, like um actually intended for being, especially with apps, actually intended for being accessible on a global marketplace where anyone can go and download your app.
uh huh, okay.
And you don't even know if and when it'll be recommended to someone. So you like, yeah.
What do you mean about being recommended?
I mean that there are some things where, like, if I put my site up, if I buy a domain and put a site on it
Yeah,
and I don't link to it from anywhere, does it even exist?
yeah,
And so, but and especially if I have it like not showing up on any search engines or anything, it's just a silent thing that I can access that can actually be not accessible at all,
yeah,
built for like specifically my phone. But if I have an app that I built that I put on either of the two big app stores, you don't really have any control over its distribution at a point.
yeah.
And it could just be recommended to people based on their other apps that they're using with no sense that it actually wasn't made for them. Um, yeah.
Um, so maybe I'm not quite understanding, but it sounds like you're saying that we'd be better off if we didn't have to worry about tailoring apps for specific audiences, or
Um,
did I misunderstand?
oh no, I'm more saying that if if there are fewer apps in this world after this law has been enacted, especially for apps, I don't see that as a negative state. I think if people then want to come up with more, and this is why I was tying it back into my example with the web, if people want to come up with more like private, this is Chucky's app distribution list, and it is not accessible. It is just all of the apps that are for uh, sighted people with perfectly good hearing,
Right.
and that's the list,
Yeah.
then great. Like that, but you know that going in. You can see that this is
Oh,
yeah.
so okay. So let me see if I understand. Are you saying that you're willing to, and I don't want to
Hmm.
misrepresent you,
Yeah.
but are you saying that you'd be willing to relax the law if people came out with disclaimers that said, "Look, this is for
Yes.
sighted people specifically"? That is what you're saying?
Up to a certain point. So where it gets fuzzy for me would be I I think that's where I think you asked me in the beginning, does it matter like the size or the market share? I wouldn't be okay with that for a place like uh God, I'll
Facebook.
say Google or
Yeah.
Facebook
Yeah.
where you have to use it for your work or your job and you just can't. really participate in a lot of the internet, which I don't agree with, but it was where we're at right now.
Yeah.
Then I wouldn't. I guess they couldn't really have disclaimers because it's like I can't
Uh-huh. Yeah.
work. Yeah, yeah.
But you would maybe be willing to say that if you're a one person shop,
Yeah.
that if you want to release an app for sighted people, that they wouldn't be required to fulfill this law. Is that the idea?
Yes, until they grew to a certain scale.
Uh-huh. And they'd
Um,
have to say up front, like,
yeah.
this is just for sighted people.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
almost like a content warning.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
It's
yeah.
like
Right.
this. Yeah.
Like, this isn't appropriate for ages 13 and
Yes.
under.
Yes. Yeah.
And
This
it's,
app will not work for you
yeah,
if you are not sighted. Um,
right.
and we are accepting that that's shitty, but moving on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think I understand. I have one more sort
Mhm.
of like area to probe.
Yeah.
Um, can you imagine? Can you imagine a kind of disability that would be too extreme or too represent too small of a group of people that it wouldn't be included? Like, there's probably
Probably. Yeah.
so there's
Yeah.
probably like there's people who the only person who suffered this,
Yeah.
they see circles as squares.
Yes.
Yeah. And like they're the only person
Yeah.
who has this. Would you want app developers to cater to those people?
I think might be, I don't know the best way of saying this. If we get to a state where we can actually be like, we are so inclusive for everyone that we have got to the point where we are worrying about those people, then we should definitely include them because we fixed a lot of shit along the way.
Uh-huh.
Where it like that's I don't so it's almost like I feel like if if we get there, that'd be amazing to me. I'd
Yeah.
consider that a win.
Yeah,
And
it's
and however we solve it after that, like for the small handfuls of people, I think we'd of course have to come up with something different and maybe something better.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
maybe more disabled people could participate in the process because we built more tech that is inclusive of them.
right. Right. It sounds like, I mean, obviously it sounds like you really care about people and making sure that
Mhm.
like that everybody has as much of the same experiences as is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah. I'm worried that it's gonna. No, yeah, I mean, if as long as you have like these things where smaller app developers maybe don't have to worry about it,
Hmm.
but otherwise it sounds like
And I think that that smaller app developers piece of it is the part that I always struggle with figuring out what even I would consider the best implementation. I
uh,
think there's a lot of ways for it to go wrong.
right,
Um, and so that's where, for me, with this problem space in particular, there's one area where I'm like, oh no, we could end up in a world where we just have a lot of closed off communities that have pretty big fundamental tech in it
yeah,
that doesn't escape from it either. So
yeah,
then it becomes messy, even in my own head of
yeah,
like what it could look like.
yeah. I'm I'm worried that if you go onto the App Store and you click default apps, like
Yeah,
widely available apps,
yeah.
there'd be 100,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you clicked on apps for sighted people,
Yeah,
there would be 1 million.
yeah. And I think for me, that's yes, that's like my internal grappling.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe you'd be happy just for the fact that the default view is the view for that is accessible,
Mm-hmm.
and that you'd have to click a button that says I only want to see cited apps.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I don't know. I I hope that one day we could get to a space where if we were, I'm going to say, self-regulating in that way, that we wouldn't fall back into the traps that we're in now. But that's, I guess, the 25% of my 75%. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, is the idea that maybe people would figure out
New,
ways,
yes, yeah,
loopholes or something.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's pretty much the idea. Would you say that you're still at 75%?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Cool. Well,
Cool.
thanks for going through
This
this
was fun. Thank you.
exercise. Yeah. Good. I'm glad.